If you got an IAM interview coming up, this video might help you. Most people walk to the IAM interviews memorizing the definitions. So I worked over the last 18 years in different IAM roles, and I've been on the both sides of the table. So these are all questions and scenarios coming up from my experience. Some of the questions are also coming from the Simplify IAM community. Check the link in the description for that. So the video is divided into multiple blocks, technical and non-technical. So make sure you follow it till the end. Let's get started. I have categorized the questions that might come in or the scenarios that will be asked in an IAM interview into 5 blocks majorly. These categories are ordered in a way that how the interview will flow from the start to the end. Let's get into the first block. These are the basics that everyone opens with, especially if a non-technical person who is a non-technical in IAM is also present in the interview asking you the questions. Even if it sounds like a non-technical question or a simple question, how you respond, how you answer instead of just simple definition will make a larger difference. For example, there might be a question, what is the difference between authentication and authorization? You might give the simple definition saying authentication is proving who you are. Authorization is what you are allowed to do once you are authenticated. Or you can say logging into your system is called authentication, and what you can access after logging in is authorization. The answer is fine in most cases because it's kind of icebreaker in the interview. Such simple questions. Let's say you can add to that simple definition of authorization and authentication. So you can say in a big company, the login problems which comes under authentication is taken care by different team altogether, and authorization is taken care by some of the teams that handles the IGA, identity governance and administration product and or service. But in small companies, both are done by one team. So that gives the interviewer we've actually known to how IAM environment might look like with respect to people and products. One of the question that might come in will actually give you an idea how you respond. For example, what is the difference between identity, account, and entitlement? You can say identity is simply a person or a human user. This human user might have multiple accounts. So on Active Directory, they have one account. On an HR system, they might have one account. On the system that gives access to the building, they might have also an account. So that's how the account looks like. And what that account can perform on each of those systems is determined by the entitlement or the permission, you could say. So that's the difference between identity, account, and entitlement. So if you can explain like this with an example, it actually establishes you as someone who knows how different things fit together in an IAM environment or IAM landscape. Let's go to the second block, how access or governance gets managed in an enterprise or in a company. And these are the questions are asked, especially if you're applying for governance related roles like IGA, like SailPoint, Okta, Workforce. All these products implement the IGA processes. So if you're applying for such positions, the questions like this might come into picture. One of the community members said they asked somebody to explain lifecycle management from start to the end. Most people can actually quickly respond to this question without freezing. They can say that somebody does this lifecycle management by means of joiner, mover, lever in a company using the IGA product like SailPoint, Savient, and other products like Okta. But that's the response anybody can give. But if you have done labs or understood the concepts a bit more using the free stuff that is available, you should be able to stand out by answering the response like this. You should say, in most typical environments, the happiest path is somebody joins the company, they get access, and when they leave the company, their access and accounts are deleted by means of lever process. The mover process, when somebody gets promoted or changes the department, that's where most of the audit problems or bugs exist, because when somebody leaves their old position within the company and moves to a new position or a new department, then their old roles might not be removed and they will still be there. Along with that, when depending on their new role within the company, they will still get some more roles. That way, the access gets piled up and there are issues caused during the audit reviews. Likewise, you can also add that if somebody is leaving the company, there might be some systems where the access and accounts of the leaver might still be active because those systems might not be connected to IGA or IAM platform. IAM platform cannot remove the access automatically, and there will be a manual task sent to the support team, and in those cases support team might have forgotten. So what I'm trying to say is, just don't try to stop at a typical happiest path of joiner mover process, because that's something everybody can answer in an interview. So make sure you do these things in lab and try to understand these things. Break the free IAM systems that you might have built in your own home setup or lab setup, and try to understand how these things work before going for an interview. So one of the questions that might be built on the previous question, like the lifecycle management explanation, is what is an orphan account? An orphan account is one that's still active within the system on a particular application, even after an employee has left the company, because the lever process might not have worked, or the application where it should have been deactivated is not connected to IAM platform. So that's one of the theoretical answers you could give, which is still correct, I would say. But if you want to go one step further, and you actually know such a scenario based on your home lab setup, or if you have worked in previous IAM roles, this is how you could answer. Like you could say, I once worked with an auditor who found some of the accounts active and access is still given to those accounts for an employee who has left the company. And because of that, there was an audit issue raised, which led to fixing that issue by means of implementing the enhancement to the lever process, where such inactive accounts are reported every week to the IAM product owner or IAM team. And also lever process takes care of flagging those active accounts which cannot be deactivated by means of automation. So if you actually explain as someone who has actually dealt with such issues and seen such orphan accounts either in your home lab setup or in your trainings, then that gives more confidence to the interviewer that we've actually seen such issues in real world. Let's go to the block 3, where it is dealt with logins, connections, and applications. Typically, you see when you are applying for a roles, customer identity and access management positions, which are dealing with like the ping, advanced identity cloud, or Auth0. So such cases, you will typically see questions like this on those roles, because those projects deal with scenarios like this. One of the typical question you would see is, what is the difference between SAML versus OIDC? So everybody will say how SAML works, or what are the different types of OIDCs. So you can know the difference by means of definition. That's fine. But if you know how things work in real world, you should add to your definition saying SAML is the old protocol, which is still relevant, but most modern one is OIDC, which is supported by most modern applications, and one should typically use OIDC wherever possible, which is lightweight and JSON based and more secure. And you should only use SAML if it cannot be supported, because SAML tends to be heavy, especially on the internet facing applications, because it's XML based and many other reasons. Now, this is the part where nobody prepares for, especially in the CIAM role, is what is the difference between delegated and application permissions. When one app asks for a permission to another app in OAuth protocol, it happens in two flavors. One is delegated permission, means app acts on behalf of a single user to access a third-party app. For example, an app might ask access to your Google Calendar, and you click continue or authorize on the screen. That's the delegated permission. You're delegating permission for that app to access your Google Calendar. Application permission means the app does not ask for your authorization or permission to act on your behalf. It acts on its own. For example, some AI agents does that are far more dangerous. And that's where something called scopes come into picture. So if you see, you can really get into the rabbit hole in an interview. Depending on how technical the interviewer is, you should probably get that feeling from the first 2-3 questions. If the interview is going by a technical or non-technical way, based on that, you should be able to drive where it goes. But you should be able to be prepared for all these concepts and hands-on experiences using the free labs. If you're searching for one, check the link in the description for the Simplify IAM community. Everything is free there. To start, you could join and get your hands on and understand the IAM concepts. Let's get back to the block 4 of the questions. Block 4 is about scenarios, where I wanted to actually talk about scenario-based questions, where most interviews tend to go. The scenario-based questions will look like this. It's not a question, it's a scenario, which means that it might have happened somewhere, and how do you actually respond to that? For example, when something works, an HR hires a person and they get added to the HR system and everything works well. In a typical scenario, an app accounts gets created on Active Directory, their email gets created and everything. What happens when a new joiner joins and their account is not ready? What might have happened? Such is the question or the scenario asked, and what would you do in those cases? So typically, such a scenario-based question usually have some kind of troubleshooting involved in it. In this case, you actually go and troubleshoot from start to the end of the particular process. For example, in this case, it's from the HR to the IAM system, and from IAM system to the target applications that are integrated where the accounts are not getting created. This is where some people might get frozen in the interview because this is not something they've prepared for. These are the questions that are going to test how do you actually think in a typical scenario based implementation in IAM system, not what you know. Because these are the questions or scenarios that are quite often asked, especially in these days, because everybody is not testing in an interview what you know, but it is the mindset, how you think in a typical scenario based situation is what makes you stand out in an IAM. So the next block 5 is about people and the experience. This is for people who might be already taking care of some of the IAM related stuff. Like if you're coming from help desk or support background or analyst background, this might be helpful because you might be targeting some of the roles are similar to your existing experience, which are people facing, end user facing. So for example, the interviewer might say, how do you explain a technical IAM concept to a non-technical person? Because you might be dealing with stakeholders, end users, then you should be able to slate the IAM terminology into a non-IAM terminology so that you can better make a point with the stakeholders or the end users. So for example, how do you explain entitlement certifications to a non-technical person? Then you should say, depending on your background, like if you're coming from a help desk or a support role, you might have lots of experience in this case where you should say, I've actually taken care of fixing the access issues for the number of users whenever they face an issue because you have worked in such a role in your previous company. If you have years spent working in such a role, explaining the frustrated users, why their access is not working and how it can be fixed. So make sure you explain that to the interviewer in an IAM interview as a strength, not as something to hide. If you are a pivoter trying to make a new career in IAM, coming from a different background, don't dread with this question. You should be honest about it and say that you have set up a lab, whether it's a CIAM lab or IGA lab, and you have actually worked on scenarios like Joiner where you have created an app integration. You have seen how that particular user gets created as an identity in an IGA system in your lab, whether it's midPoint, Entra ID, Okta on your free trial, how you actually created those scenarios. Try to explain them. If possible, show it via your GitHub repository. If that interviewer is open to screen sharing from you and you can show how you implemented it, that's also fine. Talk about the specifics, how you build the HTTP directory flow, how you triggered a lever and what it impacted. So these are all the people and experience related questions, which are non-technical. At the same time, they can be built upon your existing experience and make sure you convince the interviewer using your experience that is already might be relevant for an IAM role that you are applying for. And one of the curious questions that I ask in an interview, and also it's one of the things that's mentioned by the community member, is if you are someone who already worked in an IAM role, maybe this is for you. The question sounds like this. What is the least favorite thing about a particular product that you worked on compared to other products in the market, especially in IAM? Like if you have worked on SailPoint or Ping, the question could be like, what is the least favorite thing about Okta in your experience? You can be honest, because if you're an engineer who worked on a product, there might be something you don't like in the product in terms of whether it could be an UI or whether it could be how much customization you have to deal with on day-to-day basis. Try to be as open as possible because that's something shows that you worked on such a product, even if it could be something you worked in a lab setup. Those are the things that might come up in an IAM interview, depending on whether you are applying for a junior or a beginner role or whether it could be a senior role. But there are some senior architect related or when IAM program works, those are the questions that are not actually dealt in this video, because that actually requires a separate video on its own. So everything we have discussed in this video, you can try on your own. You can understand the concepts in depth and also try hands-on labs. You can set it up on your own from Simplify IAM community that is linked in the description. So check it out. Everything is there for you. If this video has helped you, please hit the subscribe button and also tell me what is one question that might have tripped you in an IAM interview. I will definitely answer the good ones in the comments. See you in the next video.